Hey math fans, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to solve quadratic equations by factoring when the a value is not equal to 1. Okay, so I'm going to do three problems. We're going to get each equation into standard form, which means it'll look like ax squared plus bx plus c, and it needs to equal 0. So in all three of my examples here, none of them equal 0 right away. So for the first step, make sure everything is in standard form, aka all on one side, so that it will equal 0. So with this first problem here, it equals negative 12. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plus it over to the other side, and it'll equal 0 by doing that. And what's left over, or not what's left over really, what it creates is 2x squared minus 11x plus 12. That 12 will not combine with anything else because it is not a like term. It is a constant number. It doesn't have any letters next to it. Okay, so we have the equation 2x squared minus 11x plus 12. For step 2, I wrote determine the factors of a times c that add up to b. Okay, so the factors of a times c that add up to b. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a list. So a times c, that would be taking that 2 from the 2x squared and multiplying it to the back number, the 12, and that's going to be 24. Okay, so I need to think of my factors of 24 that add up to the middle term of negative 11. All right, so I'll list my factors in descending order. 24 is 24 and 1. It's 12 and 2. And 8 and 3, and 6 and 4. Okay, it was a positive 24, but it was a negative 11 in the middle, meaning all of these factors need to be negative. Okay, so if I add them together, each pair of terms together, I'll get negative 10, negative 11, negative 14, and negative 25. So the answer is, what are the factors of a times c that add up to b? It would be negative 8 and negative 3. So with those numbers in mind, for step 3, we're going to replace the bx term with those factors from step 2. And then I wrote, don't forget to include x's with them. So what that means is this minus 11x is going to go away, and we're going to replace it with minus 8x minus 3x. The 2x squared plus 12 equals 0, all that stuff is still there. It's just the middle term disappears. So it's more like, rather than to say disappears, it's more like it expands, because minus 8x minus 3x combine to make minus 11x. So yeah, it expands. And then that final term was plus 12 equals 0. So now that we have expanded it, now we have a polynomial with 4 terms rather than 3 terms. We're going to do step 4, which is factor by grouping. I wrote factor out the GCF. GCF stands for greatest common factor from the first pair of terms and the second pair of terms respectively. So that looks like this. We're going to look at the first pair of terms and the second pair of terms. Okay, so what's common between 2x squared minus 8x? Meaning when I ask what's common, what can they both be divided by? They're both even numbers, they can both be divided by a 2, and they both have an x in common. So the GCF between those two is 2x. I'm gonna divide or factor out a 2x from those two terms. 2x squared divided by 2x is simply just x because the 2's cancel, and x squared divided by x is x. Minus 8x divided by 2x, those x's would cancel, creating a minus 4. And then I look at the second pair of terms, minus 3x plus 12. If that third term is negative, you're just about always going to factor out a negative from it. So when I look at minus 3x plus 12, I see that they're both divisible by 3. And then because that third term is negative, I'm going to divide them by a negative 3. So when I go negative 3x divided by 3, that's going to be positive x. 12 divided by negative 3, that's negative 4, and then it equals 0. And so you see that both both kind of results um, have an x minus 4, okay, in common. That's what's supposed to happen. The stuff in the parentheses should always match. If it doesn't match, you got to go back and you got to redo step 4. Maybe you messed up on step 3 or 2, okay? But the stuff on the inside should always match. And because that matches, we're able to do step 5, which is put the outside terms in their own parentheses, okay? So that means write 2x minus 3 in their own parentheses. And then I wrote, write down what was in the other parentheses next to it. Just write it down one time, and don't forget to equal it to 0. This is going to be your fully factored form. So the stuff that was next to it, the x goes x minus 4. All right, you don't need to write it down 2 times. A lot of times kids want to write it down 2 times because they saw it 2 times. But we are able to combine these because of they're both distributing to the x minus 4 like this. So when we combine it, 2x is still multiplying to x minus 4. Negative 3 is still multiplying to x minus 4. So we don't need to write it down 2 times. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Just don't forget to include your equal 0. So this is the fully factored form of the original equation when it was in standard form. All right, what you do is you take those binomial factors and you set them equal to 0. Okay, set each binomial, that's the stuff in the parentheses with an x, and equal it to 0 and solve for x. So I'm going to take 2x minus 3, equal it to 0, x minus 4, equal that to 0. Okay, always start off by adding or subtracting the constant number to the other side. So on the first one, it's plus 3 to the other side. On the second one, it's plus 4 to the other side. And that'll leave me with 2x equals 3 and x equals 4. Looks like I'm going to have to divide this one by 2 because always split up a number in the letter with division. And so that's going to be x equals 3 over 2 or 1.5 if you care to convert that to a decimal. And then the other one just x equals 4. We already figured that one out. Okay. You can always check your work by graphing, but this video is not a how-to on how to graph. So I'm just going to go up and do the next problem. So I'm going to do it the same steps. So the first step is get it into standard form. So I see it equals negative x. I want it to equal 0. So I'm going to plus x to the other side. And it's going to go right in the middle because that's my bx term. It can't combine with 4x squared because it doesn't have the power of 2 with it. Okay? And it can't combine with the 3 because that 3 is a constant number. It doesn't have any letters with it. So here I have 4x squared plus x minus 3. So the next step is what are the factors of a times c that add up to b? So a times c is 4 times negative 3, and that's negative 12. And it's got to add up to my b term, which is positive 1. So if it adds up to positive 1, that means one factor has got to be negative and one factor has got to be positive because it's multiplying to get negative 12. And so the one factor that's positive has to be the larger one in order to add together to get a positive solution. And the other factor will be negative. I might have said that a little weird. Hopefully that makes some sense though. But yeah, 12 is 12 times 1 and 6 times 2 and 4 times 3. So I'm going to make the bigger one positive and the smaller factor negative. So that way when they add together, it makes a positive result, makes a positive sum. Okay, so I get 11, 4, and 1. So I'm going to use 4 and negative 3 because those add up to get that positive 1 for that middle term. Okay, so the next step is I'm going to use these two numbers to replace this middle term. So 4x squared plus x minus 3 equals 0 becomes 4x squared plus 4x minus 3x minus 3 equals 0. And now I move on to the next step, which is factor by grouping. look at the first pair of terms and the second pair of terms. So the greatest common factor between 4x squared plus 4x is 4x. They're both divisible by 4x. That's going to give me 4x squared divided by 4x is x. 4x divided by 4x is 1. And then the second pair of terms, minus 3x minus 3, they're both divisible by a negative 3. Negative 3x divided by negative 3 is x. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is positive 1. So you see that the x plus 1, I have that 2 times. That's what should happen. The stuff inside the parentheses should always match. And so the next step is to take the stuff on the outside and put them in their own parentheses. So 4x minus 3 gets grouped together, and then just write down the stuff that was next to it in the parentheses. The stuff that was in the parentheses next to it, write it down one time. Okay? So this is my fully factored form, 4x minus 3, x plus 1. Then I'm going to take those factors, those binomials, and set them each equal to 0 and solve for x. Okay, always look for a number you can add or subtract to the other side first. Those are your constant numbers. And so I'm going to add 3 to the other side, and then the other one I'll minus 1 to the other side. And I will get 4x equals 3. And this one I get x equals negative 1. I forgot to write the equals 0. Okay, and then I have to split up the 4 from the x by dividing it. And so I get x equals 3 over 4 for one solution and negative 1 for the other solution. We got time to do one more. And so I got 3x squared plus 8x plus 26 equals negative 7x plus 8. I see that I can add this 7x over to the other side. I'll put it under the 8x because it's a like term. And then I'll minus 8 under that 26 because they're both constant terms. So they are also like terms. So now it'll equal 0. So this gives me 3x squared plus 15x plus 18 equals 0. Okay? So I go, okay, what's my a times c? 3 times 18 is 54. What are my factors of 54? 54 and 1, 27 and 2, we got 18 and 3, and 9 and 6. And so which two add up to get the middle term? My middle term was 15. Well, that would be 9 and 6. 9 plus 6 is 15. All these other ones, that's 21, that's 29, that's 55. So it has to be 9 and 6. So that means I'm going to take 3x squared plus 15x plus 18, and I'm going to drop that 15x, and I'm going to rewrite it. So I get 3x squared, and instead of 15x, I put plus 9x plus 6x. I'm expanding it. And then I keep that third term, which was 18, equal it to 0. Okay? So now we go, okay, let's factor by grouping. The first two terms are divisible by 3x. 3x squared divided by 3x is x. 9x divided by 3x is 3. The second pair of terms, 6x and 18, are both divisible by a 6. So I'll put plus 6. And then I'll get 6x divided by 6 is x. 18 divided by 6 is 3. Okay, the insides match. They both say x plus 3. So I'll take those outside terms together and group them together. And I get 3x plus 6 and x plus 3 equals 0. Now this one's a little bit special because you see that 3x plus 6 still have a greatest common factor they can be divided by. So they're both divisible by 3. So what I'm going to do is 3x divided by 3 is x, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So I'm going to factor out that extra factor, if you will. And so this right here is my fully factored form. It doesn't happen often, but if you notice, we could have actually done that for the first step, but I wanted to do it the same way I did all the other problems. But the original problem, 3x squared plus 15x plus 18, all those terms were divisible by 3. So you could choose to do it that way. I just chose to do it this way, so that way I'd follow the same steps as I did before. Anyway, the benefit of doing that is I take x plus 2 and x plus 3 and I equal those both to 0. And, those are simple equations to solve. Minus 2 to the other side, minus 3 to the other side. And I'm going to get x equals negative 2 and I get x equals negative 3 for my two solutions. Okay, so that's going to conclude this video. I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching and goodbye.